Machiavelli, the Prince, Chapter 8 Of those who have attained the position of prince by villainy. But as there are still two ways of becoming prince which cannot be attributed entirely either to fortune or to ability, they must not be passed over, although one of them could be more fully discussed if we were treating of republics. These are when one becomes prince by some nefarious or villainous means, or when a private citizen becomes the prince of his country through the favor of his fellow citizens. And in speaking of the former means, I will give two examples, one ancient and the other modern, without entering further into the merits of this method, as I judge them to be sufficient for any one obliged to imitate them. Agathocles the Sicilian rose not only from private life, but from the lowest and most abject position to be king of Syracuse. The son of a potter, he led a life of the utmost wickedness through all the stages of his fortune. Nevertheless, his wickedness was accompanied by such vigor of mind and body that, having joined the militia, he rose through all its grades to be praetor of Syracuse. Having been appointed to this position, and having decided to become prince, and to hold with violence and without the support of others that which had been granted him, and having imparted his designs to Hamilcar the Carthaginian, who with his armies was fighting in Sicily, he called together one morning the people and senate of Syracuse, as if he had to deliver on matters of importance to the republic, and at a given signal had all the senators and the richest men of the people killed by his soldiers. After their death he occupied and held rule over the city without any civil disorders. And although he was twice beaten by the Carthaginians and ultimately besieged, he was able not only to defend the city, but leaving a portion of his forces for its defense, with the remainder he invaded Africa, and in a short time liberated Syracuse from the siege and brought the Carthaginians to great extremities, so that they were obliged to come to terms with him, and remained contented with the possession of Africa, leaving Sicily to Agathocles. Whoever considers, therefore, the actions and qualities of this man will see few if any things which can be attributed to fortune, for, as above stated, it was not by the favor of any person, but through the grades of the militia, which he had gained with 1,000 hardships and perils, that he arrived at the position of prince, which he afterwards maintained by so many courageous and perilous expedients. It cannot be called a virtue to kill one's fellow citizens, betray one's friends, be without faith, without pity, and without religion, by which methods one may indeed gain an empire, but not glory. For if the virtues of Agathocles in braving and overcoming perils, and his greatness of soul in supporting and surmounting obstacles be considered, one sees no reason for holding him inferior to any of the most renowned captains. Nevertheless, his barbarous cruelty and inhumanity, together with his countless atrocities, do not permit of his being named among the most famous men. We cannot attribute to fortune or merit that which he achieved without either. In our own times, during the reign of Alexander VI, Oliverato di Fermo had been left a young boy under the care of his maternal uncle Giovanni Fogliani, who brought him up and sent him in early youth to fight under Paolo Vitelli, in order that he might, under that discipline, obtain a good military position. On the death of Paolo, he fought under his brother Vitellozzo, and in a very short time, being of great intelligence and active in mind and body, he became one of the leaders of his troops. But deeming it servile to be under others, he resolved, with the help of some citizens of Fermo, who preferred servitude to the liberty of their country, and with the favor of the Vitellis to occupy Fermo, he therefore wrote to Giovanni Fogliani how, having been for many years away from home, he wished to come and see him in his city, and in some measure to revisit his estates. And as he had only labored to gain honor, in order that his fellow citizens might see that he had not spent his time in vain, he wished to come honorably, accompanied by 100 horsemen, his friends and followers, and prayed him that he would be pleased to order that he should be received with honor by the citizens of Fermo, by which he would honor not only him, Oliverotto, but also himself, as he had been his pupil. Giovanni did not fail in any duty towards his nephew. He caused him to be honorably received by the people of Fermo, and lodged him in his own houses. After waiting some days to arrange all that was necessary to his villainous projects, Oliverotto invited Giovanni Fogliani and all the principal men of Fermo to a grand banquet. After the dinner and the entertainments usual at such feasts, Oliverotto artfully introduced certain important matters of discussion, speaking of the greatness of Pope Alexander, and of his son Cesare, and of their enterprises. To which discourses, Giovanni and others having replied, he all at once rose, saying that these matters should be spoken of in a more secret place, and withdrew into a room where Giovanni and the other citizens followed him. They were no sooner seated than soldiers rushed out of hiding places and killed Giovanni and all the others. After which massacre, Oliverotto mounted his horse, rode through the town, and besieged the chief magistrate in his palace, so that through fear they were obliged to obey him and form a government, of which he made himself prince. And all those being dead who, if discontented, could injure him, he fortified himself with new orders, civil and military, in such a way that within the year that he held the principality he was not only safe himself in the city of Fermo, but had become formidable to all his neighbors. And his overthrow would have been difficult, like that of Agathocles, if he had not allowed himself to be deceived by Cesare Borgia when he besieged the Orsinis and Vitellis at Sinigaglia, as already related, where he also was taken 1 year after the parricide he had committed, and strangled together with Vitellozzo, who had been his teacher in ability and atrocity. Some may wonder how it came about that Agathocles and others like him could, after infinite treachery and cruelty, live secure for many years in their country and defend themselves from external enemies without being conspired against by their subjects, although many others have, through their cruelty, been unable to maintain their position in times of peace, not to speak of the uncertain times of war. I believe this arises from the cruelties being used well or badly. Well used may be called those, if it is permissible to use the word well of evil, which are committed once for the need of securing oneself, and which afterwards are not persisted in, but are exchanged for measures as useful to the subjects as possible. Cruelties ill used are those which, although at first few, increase rather than diminish with time. Those who follow the former method may remedy in some measure their condition, both with God and man, as did Agathocles. As to the others, it is impossible for them to maintain themselves. Whence it is to be noted that in taking a state the conqueror must arrange to commit all his cruelties at once, so as not to have to recur to them every day, and so as to be able, by not making fresh changes, to reassure people and win them over by benefiting them. Whoever acts otherwise, either through timidity or bad counsels, is always obliged to stand with knife in hand, and can never depend on his subjects, because they, through continually fresh injuries, are unable to depend upon him. For injuries should be done altogether, so that being less tasted, they will give less offense. Benefits should be granted little by little, so that they may be better enjoyed. And after all, a prince must live with his subjects in such a way that no accident should make him change it, for good or evil, for necessity arising in adverse times. You are not in time with severity, and the good that you do does not profit you, as it is judged to be forced, and you will derive no benefit whatever from it. Chapter 9 of the Civic Principality. But we now come to the case where a citizen becomes prince not through crime or intolerable violence, but by the favor of his fellow citizens, which may be called a civic principality. To arrive at this position depends not entirely on worth or entirely on fortune, but rather on cunning assisted by fortune. One attains it by help of popular favor or by the favor of the aristocracy. For in every city these two opposite parties are to be found, arising from the desire of the populace to avoid the oppression of the great, and the desire of the great to command and oppress the people. And from these two opposing interests arises in the city one of three effects, either absolute government, liberty, or license. The former is created either by the populace or the nobility, depending on the relative opportunities of the two parties. For when the nobility see that they are unable to resist the people, they unite in creating one of their number prince, so as to be able to carry out their own designs under the shadow of his authority. The populace, on the other hand, when unable to resist the nobility, endeavor to create a prince in order to be protected by his authority. He who becomes prince by help of the nobility has greater difficulty in maintaining his power than he who is raised by the populace, for he is surrounded by those who think themselves of equals, and is thus unable to direct or command as he pleases. But one who is raised to the leadership by popular favor finds himself alone, and has no one or very few who are not ready to obey him. Besides which, it is impossible to satisfy the nobility by fair dealing, and without inflicting injury on others, whereas it is very easy to satisfy the mass of the people in this way. For the aim of the people is more honest than that of the nobility, the latter desiring to oppress, and the former merely to avoid oppression. It must also be added that the prince can never insure himself against a hostile populace on account of their number, but he can against the hostility of the great, as they are but few. The worst that a prince has come to expect from a hostile people is to be abandoned, but from hostile nobles he has to fear not only abandonment, but their active opposition, and as they are more far-seeing and more cunning, they are always in time to save themselves and take sides with the one who they expect will conquer. The prince is, moreover, obliged to live always with the same people. The prince is, moreover, obliged to live always with the same people, but he can easily do without the same nobility, being able to make them and unmake them at any time, and increase their position or deprive them of it as he pleases. And to throw further light on this part, I would say that the nobles are to be considered in two different manners. That is, they are either to be ruled so as to make them entirely depend on your fortunes, or else not. Those that are thus bound to you and are not rapacious must be honored and loved. Those who are not bound must be considered in two ways. They either do this through pusillanimity and natural want of courage, and in this case you ought to make use of them, and especially such as are of good counsel, so that they may honor you in prosperity, and in adversity you have not to fear them. But when they are not bound to you of set purpose and for ambitious ends, it is a sign that they think more of themselves than of you, and from such men the prince must guard himself and look upon them as secret enemies, who will help to ruin him when in adversity. One, however, who becomes prince by favor of the populace must maintain its friendship, which he will find easy, the people asking nothing but not to be oppressed. But one who against the people's wishes becomes prince by favor of the nobles should above all endeavor to gain the favor of the people. This will be easy to him if he protects them. And as men who receive good from those they expected evil from feel under a greater obligation to their benefactor, so the subject populace will become even better disposed towards him than if he had become prince through their favor. The prince can win their favor in many ways, which vary according to circumstances, for which no certain rule can be given and will therefore be passed over. I will only say in conclusion that it is necessary for a prince to possess the friendship of the people, otherwise he has no resource in times of adversity. Nabis, prince of the Spartans, sustained a siege by the whole of Greece and a victorious Roman army, defended against them his country, and maintained his own position. It sufficed when the danger arose for him to make sure of a few, which would not have been enough if the populace had been hostile to him. And let no one oppose my opinion in this by quoting the trite proverb, "He who builds on the people builds on mud," because that is true when a private citizen relies upon the people and persuades himself that they will liberate him if he is oppressed by enemies or by the magistrates. In this case he might often find himself deceived, as happened in Rome to the Gracchi and in Florence to Messer Giorgio Scali. But when it is a prince who founds himself on this basis, one who can command and is a man of courage, and does not get frightened in adversity, and does not neglect other preparations, and one who by his own courage and measures animates the mass of the people, he will not find himself deceived by them, and he will find that he has laid his foundations well. Usually, these principalities are in danger when the prince from the position of a civil ruler changes to an absolute one, for these princes either command themselves or by means of magistrates. In the latter case, their position is weaker and more dangerous, for they are at the mercy of those citizens who are appointed magistrates, who can, especially in times of adversity, with great facility deprive them of their position, either by acting against them or by not obeying them. The prince is not in time, in such dangers, to assume absolute authority, for the citizens and subjects who are accustomed to take their orders from the magistrates are not ready in these emergencies to obey his, and he will always in doubtful times lack men whom he can rely on. Such a prince cannot base himself on what he sees in quiet times, when the citizens have need of the state, for then every one is full of promises, and each one is ready to die for him when death is far off. But in adversity, when the state has need of citizens, then he will find but few. And this experience is the more dangerous in that it can only be had once. Therefore, a wise prince will seek means by which his subjects will always and in every possible condition of things have need of his government, and they will always be faithful to him. Chapter 10. How the strength of all states should be measured. In examining the character of these principalities, it is necessary to consider another point, namely, whether the prince has such a position as to be able in case of need to maintain himself alone, or whether he has always need of the protection of others. To better explain this, I would say that I consider those capable of maintaining themselves alone, who can through abundance of men or money put together a sufficient army, and hold the field against anyone who assails them. And I consider to have need of others, those who cannot take the field against their enemies, but are obliged to take refuge within their walls and stand on the defensive. We have already discussed the former case, and will speak in future of it as occasion arises. In the second case there is nothing to be said, except to encourage such a prince to provision and fortify his own town, and not to trouble about the country. And whoever has strongly fortified his town, and as regards the government of his subjects, has proceeded as we have already described and will further relate, will be attacked with great reluctance, for men are always averse to enterprises in which they foresee difficulties, and it can never appear easy to attack one who has his town well guarded and is not hated by the people. The cities of Germany are extremely liberal, having little surrounding country, and obey the emperor when they choose, and they do not fear him or any other potentiate that they have about them. They are fortified in such a manner that everyone thinks that to reduce them would be tedious and difficult, for they all have the necessary moats and bastions, sufficient artillery, and always keep in the public storehouses food and drink and fuel for 1 year. Beyond which, to keep the lower class satisfied, and without loss to the public, they have always enough means to give them work for 1 year in these employments which form the nerve and life of the town, and in the industries by which the lower classes live, military exercises are still held in reputation, and many regulations are in force for maintaining them. A prince, therefore, who possesses a strong city, and does not make himself hated, cannot be assaulted, and if he were to be so, the assailant would be obliged to retire shamefully, for so many things change, that it is almost impossible for anyone to hold the field for a year with his armies idle. And to those who urge that the people, having their possessions outside and seeing them burnt, will not have patience, and the long siege and self-interest will make them forget their prince, I reply that a powerful and courageous prince will always overcome those difficulties by now raising the hopes of his subjects that the evils will not last long, now impressing them with fear of the enemy's cruelty, now by dexterously assuring himself of those who appear too bold. Besides which, the enemy would naturally burn and ruin the country on first arriving, and in the time when men's minds are still hot and eager to defend themselves, and therefore the prince has still less to fear, for after some days, when people have cooled down, the damage is done, the evil has been suffered, and there is no remedy, so that they are the more ready to unite with their prince, as it appears that he is under an obligation to them, their houses having been burnt and their possessions ruined in his defense. It is the nature of men to be as much bound by the benefits that they confer as by those they receive, from which it follows that, everything considered, a prudent prince will not find it difficult to uphold the courage of his subjects, both at the commencement and during a state of siege, if he possesses provisions and means to defend himself. Chapter 11. Of Ecclesiastical Principalities. It now remains to us only to speak of ecclesiastical principalities, with regard to which the difficulties lie wholly before they are possessed. They are acquired either by ability or by fortune, but are maintained without either, for they are sustained by the ancient religious customs, which are so powerful and of such quality that they keep their princes in power in whatever manner they proceed and live. These alone have a state without defending it, have subjects without governing them, and the states, not being defended, are not taken from them. The subjects, not being governed, do not disturb themselves, and neither think of nor are capable of alienating themselves from them. Only these principalities, therefore, are secure and happy. But as they are upheld by higher causes, which the human mind cannot attain to, I will abstain from speaking of them, for being exalted and maintained by God, it would be the work of a presumptuous and foolish man to discuss them. However, I might be asked how it has come about that the Church has reached such great temporal power, when, previous to Alexander VI, the Italian potentates, and not merely the really powerful ones, but every lord or baron, however insignificant, held it in slight esteem as regards temporal power, whereas now it is dreaded by a king of France, whom it has been able to drive out of Italy, and has also been able to ruin the Venetians. Therefore, although this is well known, I do not think it superfluous to call it to mind. Before Charles, King of France, came into Italy, this country was under the rule of the Pope, the Venetians, the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. These potentates had to have two chief cares: one, that no foreigner should enter Italy by force of arms; the other, that none of the existing governments should extend its dominions. Those chiefly to be watched were the Pope and the Venetians. To keep back the Venetians required the ruin of all the others, as in the defense of Ferrara, and to keep down the Pope they made use of the Roman barons. These were divided into two factions, the Orsinis and the Colonnas, and as there was constant quarreling between them, and they were constantly under arms before the eyes of the Pope, they kept the papacy weak and infirm. And although there arose now and then a resolute pope like Sextus, yet his fortune or ability was never able to liberate him from these evils. The shortness of their life was the reason for this, for in the course of 10 years, which as a general rule a pope lived, he had great difficulty in suppressing even one of the factions, and if, for example, a pope had almost put down the Colonnas, a new pope would succeed who was hostile to the Orsinis, which caused the Colonnas to spring up again, and he was not in time to suppress them. This caused the temporal power of the pope to be of little esteem in Italy. Then arose Alexander VI, who, of all the pontiffs who have ever reigned, best showed how a pope might prevail both by money and by force. With Duke Valentine as his instrument, and on the occasion of the French invasion, he did all that I have previously described in speaking of the actions of the Duke, and although his object was to aggrandize not the Church but the Duke, what he did resulted in the aggrandizement of the Church, which after the death of the Duke became the heir of his labors. Then came Pope Julius, who found the Church powerful, possessing all Romagna, all the Roman barons suppressed, and the factions destroyed by the severity of Alexander. He also found the way open for accumulating wealth in ways never used before the time of Alexander. These measures were not only followed by Julius, but increased. He resolved to gain Bologna, put down the Venetians, and drove the French from Italy, in all which enterprises he was successful. He merits the greater praise, as he did everything to increase the power of the Church, and not of any private person. He also kept the Orsini and Colonna parties in the conditions in which he found them, and although there were some leaders among them who might have made changes, there were two things that kept them steady: one, the greatness of the Church, which they dreaded; the other, the fact that they had no cardinals, who were the origin of the tumults among them. For these parties are never at rest when they have cardinals, for these stir up the parties both within Rome and outside, and the barons are forced to defend them. Thus, from the ambitions of prelates arise the discords and tumults among the barons. His Holiness Pope Leo X therefore has found the pontificate in a very powerful condition, from which it is hoped that as these popes made it great by force of armies, so he through his goodness and infinite other virtues will make it both great and venerated.